So this is Periscope 2.2 running on localhost, so I'm running it locally. The data is very simple, so if you see some invalid energy data or something, or the data is too high, it's because the data is not exactly real. It's for demonstration purposes. So you might notice a few changes already, which I'll go into more detail, but I'm going to start off by going through the two new viewlets that we've added. So I'm going to go into the library, and I've saved an alarm viewlet and sustainability, so the alarm and the wind viewlet. So this is the alarm viewlet, which is new in 2.2. The intention is to replace the AX alarm console so that Periscope users can view the AX alarm data, navigate it, and see when new alarms occur. So the default view is pretty cluttered like AX because we're showing all of our alarms that have occurred today. So as I scroll down, I can see alarms that are in the fault state. I can see columns which can be configured, and I can see these filters at the bottom, so I can change the date range to yesterday or to another time. So one of the things that differentiates the alarm viewlet versus the alarm console is this concept of filters. In Workbench, you can go in and create an alarm filter, but if you exit Workbench or leave the page and go back to the alarm console, that filter is not saved, and you have to redo it every time you go in. So this alarm viewlet allows you to create filters for specific sites or specific types of equipment or priorities and save them so that a user that may not know how to create the filters can quickly jump through them to see what's important to them. So to create a filter, I'm first going to show you the Filters tab, and this is how you would create a filter. Again, similar to the AX, but organized a little bit different. We've got an all alarm filter, and we see that it's got a default date range of today. We can choose whether we want to view act alarms or unacknowledged alarms, which source states we want to see, whether they're in fault or normal. So to clean this up a little bit, let's uncheck act because we don't want to see alarms that have been acknowledged, and we don't want to see alarms that are normal. So as I click OK, we see that we can see just a subset of our existing alarms, and this filter is now saved to just show these alarms. Another thing we've added is the ability to chart when the alarms occurred over time. So this chart button will show us that out of those alarms that we filtered, we had 2 alarms occur between the 7:30 and 8 o'clock range, and we had 5 alarms occur between 10 and 10:30. So this is not very helpful with this small amount of alarms, but if you've got a lot of alarms, this could quickly allow you to see that noon every day lots of equipment is failing or lots of points are going fault. And another important concept of the alarm viewlet is that it's tied in to the alarm metadata. So metadata allows you to add additional tags or data to alarms so that we can do filters and more advanced analysis of the alarm database. For example, we could tag all of our alarms a specific building or a specific type of equipment or zip code, and then later we can go back and find all of our alarms that are in this zip code or part of this building or this region, etc. So to do this, it's kind of a multi-step process. First, we need to go into Workbench and add metadata to our alarms if they're not already there. So let me open up Workbench, and I've got a points folder, in an alarms folder. So these are the 6 points that are generating all of those alarms. They are changing pretty quickly and generating pretty quickly. So it's not really realistic, but it is generating some data that we can look at. So if I click on an alarm such as Atkins RTU, as expected, we've got an out-of-range alarm extension, which is generating the alarms. And down here, we've got a metadata property, which comes default on the out-of-range alarm extension. So this is where you add metadata in AX. So some systems integrators already do this, but most of the time, if you want to utilize this feature, you would have to add data on top of the alarms. So this is optional, but it does help organize in large-scale systems. So we see that this Atkins alarm has a building tag and an equipment tag. And actually, all of these points have the similar thing, building tag and equipment tag. So at this point, Periscope does not know what these tags are. So after they've been tagged, we would go into the configuration of this alarm viewlet and make sure that all of our choices align. So the buildings that we have that we want Periscope to see are Atkins, Bernard, and Cypress, and the equipment are RTU and Boiler. And you can add additional ones or delete them or edit them. But right now in 2.2, you do have to come in here and make sure they match. Otherwise, you're not going to get any results. One thing that we are working on right now is the ability to press a discover button, and we will just populate it with all of the available or possible tags coming from AX. So that's a lot of work. What does it do for the end user? Once you have tags configured, we can now go into our filter and create a filter not only off of our default AX parameters that define an alarm, but we can also create filters based off of our metadata. So let's go up here and let's create a new filter, and we'll call it Atkins. And default date range today is fine. Just unacknowledged alarms is fine. And we're not going to specify a priority, which could be, just high priority alarms, for example. But we do want to say that we just want Atkins alarms. And let's say we just want Atkins RTU alarms. So if I click OK, we've now got the filter Atkins selected. And we see that the only ones that we're seeing is Atkins RTU from the Atkins RTU source. So let me go back to filter, and another thing we can do with metadata is specify our columns. So under columns, we've got all the default columns that you can see, like if we wanted to see priority or who acknowledged the alarm. But if you click on meta columns, we can now select building and equipment, because those are the two metadata types that have been defined. So as I click OK, we now can see that this is from the building Atkins and the equipment RTU. So once this has been configured, this user can go in here and quickly switch between all alarms and Atkins. And again, so far this has been extremely helpful for people that are managing an alarm database, so that they can jump between buildings or jump between priorities without having to navigate through the giant list or work through the workbench filter every time they want to view this. One more feature of the critical alarm viewlet is that we can group, for example, by source. Let me change that. Let's view more alarms. So the group is kind of like in Workbench. I think the default view of the alarm console will group all of your alarms by source. So this Atkins RTU alarm has actually triggered 65 times, but we're only showing it once. And you can double click on it to drill down into it to see all of those 65 alarms. And You can also acknowledge alarms with the acknowledge button, and that works in batch as well, so you can quickly acknowledge alarms. Okay, so that's pretty much it for the alarm viewlet. We're actually working on this a lot in the next version of Periscope. There's a bunch of cool features we're adding, such as pop-ups when an alarm occurs, and making it a little bit easier, but so far this has been very popular for systems integrators and people managing alarms. The other new viewlet we've added is our wind generation viewlet. So I will add the sustainability tab that I've saved. And I don't have great data on my local host. I can show you a live site real quick, but this is just demonstrating that we have standardized on a look and feel for our sustainability viewlets. The EV viewlet has always had this design, but the solar viewlet has been completely redone, and the wind viewlet is a new viewlet. So they all match now the same look and feel. We can monitor electric vehicle charging stations, solar PVs, and wind turbines. Another thing that you might notice is that these two are smaller than the EV one. We've added scaling so that they actually will dynamically change size. Previously they took up the whole screen, which wasn't very helpful. So let me show you real quickly a solar viewlet that's working at an actual site. Okay, so this is one of our customers in Raleigh, North Carolina. It's actually the city of Raleigh. They've got some PVs set up, and they've also got electric vehicle charging stations, so they're really a great customer for all the sustainability stuff we've been working on. But the basics are similar to EV and similar to the old solar. We've got a solar home. We've got a map which will display in real time all of the charging and whether they're working or future locations. We can see some equivalencies in real time, so I can click on this week and see that we have generated 7,000 kilowatt hours, or equivalent of $445, and you can do that for any period of time. We can rank our sites against each other, our PVs, to see how well each one is performing, and the last tab allows you to drill down to a specific site and look at its trends over time. So these viewlets are what we call focus viewlets. A lot of these components, like this chart right here, can be created with a regular dual axis chart in Periscope, but we felt that this consolidated custom view works really well for something like sustainability projects, but that they also will take this data and put it into different viewlets to run different analytics. Okay, so those are our new viewlets. Now we're going to jump into Periscope Configuration, where we have made a lot of changes and a lot of advanced features as well. So again, just type in the chat if you need me to go more in depth. So on the configuration side, oops, I want to go to localhost Periscope config. Okay, so on the configuration side, we've got again, pretty basic dashboard. We've got I think 10 locations, or more than 10 locations, for example buildings with color set up and square footage set up. And if I click on the Trends tab, like always, it discovers the trends. But we did completely revamp the way that we discover trends. So it's now more than twice as fast. We were having some issues with some sites that had over 10,000 trends. It could take up to a minute to complete that, but now it does it in seconds, so it's a lot quicker. But the feature that I'm going to show you first is our ability to modify trends in real time, which we are calling our virtual trends feature. And this is probably best demonstrated by first going through how it works on the AX side and then showing you how it works on the Periscope side, so you really understand what's going on. So I'm going to put them both on the screen at the same time. And under our Periscope service, we've got a new container, new folder called Dynamic Histories. So right now it's blank because I haven't created any virtual trends. So I'm going to manually create some virtual trends to demonstrate how someone, perhaps a systems integrator, could come in here and modify trend data. This is not the only way to do it. This is probably not the preferred way to do it because Periscope does have a GUI to perform these same actions. So to create a virtual trend, the first thing we need to do is create a history source. So a history source is basically just a link to a trend that we're attempting to modify. So if I double click on this history source, it's a very basic property sheet. The only thing we have to specify is the ORD that points to the history. So I will choose our history, and we will work off of our energy trends that I've imported. So Atkins KWH. So one task that I've been assigned a few times that has always been a major pain is the ability to modify a history from the start to do something like multiply it by 5 or change the unit or add two trends together. So those are the types of things that this feature solves. Previously, as a systems integrator, you would have to export that trend to CSV. You would have to open it up in Excel, modify every record with a new column, save it as a CSV, re-import it into AX, and hope that AX will write on top of it, because sometimes it complains and branches to a new trend. So I've spent days working on that process, and if it's a large scale, if you have to do more than one, it could take weeks of time. So this history source is pointing to Atkins. Let me rename it to be a little bit more clear. And once you have a history source, we have to tell Periscope what kind of conversion we want to do to it. So all of that happens in the history function block. So we add one of those. And inside of the history function block, we have to tell it how many inputs we're working with. In this case, we're just working with one input, the Atkins trend. After I clicked OK, we see that it created a dynamic slot called input A. So if I go back to the wire sheet, this is where we're going to link in our history source. So now our history function, which I can call Atkins, real quick, we're just going to multiply Atkins times 2. So we'll call Atkins 2. So now this history function is working with the single input of Atkins 2, and it's in the input of input A. So now what we need to do is tell the history function block how to perform the calculation. This function slot is where you write the equation, and in this case we're going to do A times 2, because A is, that variable A is now pointing to our history of Atkins. And we'll save this in the history device of Periscope with the history name of Atkins 2. Okay. So now if I do actions and a history rewrite, and I scroll down to my history container, we've got a new Atkins 2 history, which is 2 times the amount of the Atkins history. So we just saved a lot of work in a very short amount of time, and as the Atkins 1, or as the original Atkins history is written to, this history will automatically be updated. And basically this happens, this history function block is listening to the history source. Anytime a JACE writes to that history, or a history extension writes to the history, this block is notified and will calculate the function on each new record and save it to the Atkins 2. So it really is a real-time times 2 of the Atkins history. So that's pretty cool, but what if we wanted to add a couple histories together? So we had 2 submeters and we wanted to get the total, but the systems integrator did not perform that calculation. So again, you could go into AX and do that logic, but it would just start now. So the benefit of doing it through dynamic histories is that it goes all the way back in time to the beginning of the history and keeps up to the future as well. So to do this, we'll real quickly, we'll create another history source for Bernard, and we'll change this to point to Bernard. So this is still pointing to Atkins. And we'll create another history function. We'll call this total. So this is going to represent the total of Atkins plus Bernard. So I need to set my inputs to 2 this time instead of 1. And I need to link my Atkins source to input A and Bernard source to input B. And in the function, as expected, we are going to do A plus B. So these are, again, very simple, but it does support more advanced things like square root. But in this case, we just need to do A plus B. We will call this history total. And one thing different, if you've got more than one history input, we have a couple more options to tweak what the resulting history looks like. So we have to tell it an execution this time, so we want it to occur every hour, for example. And we have to give it a roll-up. So let's say we want it to calculate an hourly roll-up of the sum for each history. And it's a little bit more confusing, but the reason for this is that we can't listen to both histories at the same time, because if you're listening to 100 histories and you trigger each time one changes, we would be doing a whole lot of extra work. And also, our source histories could be trending at different intervals. One could be change of value, one could be 5-minute, one could be 15-minute. So to get those all in the same interval, we have to roll it up. So we're going to roll up by hourly, and every hour we're going to do our calculations. So if I do a rewrite, I see we've got a new trend called total, which is an hourly trend that goes up to now for A plus B, or Atkins plus Bernard. So that was the hard way to do it. Now we'll go into Periscope and show you how to do that in Periscope config. So I'm going to delete this work. And I could go into the history. Deleting the sources doesn't actually delete the trends. I would have to go into my history database maintenance to do that. Okay, so first thing that I showed you was how to scale the Atkins history. To do that in Periscope config, we would go to our Trends tab, and we've got a new Convert button that has a little function icon. So let me delete a couple of these I was testing with earlier. Okay, so now we're back to a clean slate. So this Atkins trend, last time we multiplied by 5. The convert button allows us to scale a trend to convert the units. So if I click on the convert with Atkins selected, I get a new dialog, which is our convert dialog. It's very similar to the add trends dialog and the edit trends dialog. But this one allows us to convert to a different unit. So I can change to something like BTU. It figures out the scale for this kWh unit. So since we provided an energy unit of kilowatt hours, Periscope will create this drop-down of all of the available energy units that our source trend can be converted to. So if we chose mega BTU or therms, it's going to convert them in real time. So let's choose BTU, and it's going to automatically give the name of, it automatically appends the unit name to the trend. So since my trend was called Atkins kWh, it's now called Atkins kWh BTU. We can simplify it though to something like Atkins BTU. Okay, so I will click OK and press save. And when I do, I can see that under the hood, it did those few steps that we did earlier automatically. So we've got a history source, which is pointing to the Atkins, and we've got a history function, which scales our Atkins trend by this 3412 number. And it placed it in a history device called conversions. So if I look down here, we've got a new conversions of Atkins and BTU. So quickly we just changed our unit to a trend, and now we've got a new trend that is always going to be updated as the Atkins trend is updated. So pretty powerful stuff. In addition, we can do this in batch. So if you had a whole bunch of kWh that you wanted to convert, you could do that. And you could also convert different units at the same time. So I've got an Atkins BTU now, I've got an Atkins kWh, and I've got a Bernard kWh. Sometimes with energy, people may want to convert everything to therm, for example, or everything needs to be mega BTU. So this convert button works with different units as long as they're of the same type. So all three of these units, if I select all of them, are energy type units. And Periscope recognizes that since they're all the same type, we can apply conversion to all three of them. If I had added something like cost in the mix or area, Periscope would complain and say you can't do that because not all of them can be converted to therm. So if I select therm as a unit, it's going to find the proper scale for each of our source types. So the BTU scale is going to be different than our kWh scale. And we can also specify this location needs to be Atkins, this location needs to be Bernard. We'll just say that these new names are okay, click OK and save it. And now we've got a bunch more that are created automatically. Okay, so this is really just another interface to what I was doing earlier. It is a lot easier to use, quicker to use as well. So I'm going to delete these now. Well, let me click on one of these therms to show you that this is now therms 3.71 compared to BTU of 330,000. So it is actually scaling them. So this is kind of like the simplified scaling that I showed you. The next portion that I showed you, we were adding two trends together. To do that, we have a new tab called History Groups. We go back here and we'll clean this up as well. Okay, so History Groups is a completely new tab in Periscope Config. It works very similar to the AX history group editor. I'm not sure how many of you are familiar with history grouping in AX, but it was introduced in 3.5, and it allows you to create new hierarchies on trend data. So sometimes you'll have thousands of trends in a web supervisor, and they're all separated by default of the JACE, but really you will just want to see all your KWH trends together and all of your cost trends together. So you would use history grouping to create a new hierarchy on top of the existing hierarchy. So by default, this is the default AX hierarchy. So if I look over here under my histories, it's the same thing. I've got Atlanta history device all the way to Richmond history device. If I click on energy, I see all of the trends within energy. And I also see tags. So just like, or very similar to the metadata that I applied to alarming, we can apply metadata to histories to give it more information about what is represented by the history. So we've got a unit tag called KWH. These are watt hours, although the trend is actually KWH just to demonstrate. They're all of the type energy, and they're in different zones. So once you have tag data, which I think will become more prevalent in the future versions of AX, they're working on a lot of tagging stuff as well. Once you've got your tag data, which you can do inside of AX or inside of Periscope. So for example, I can click on Add Metadata, create a new property, or batch add properties, edit or remove properties. So I've tagged my data. I can now create new hierarchies to represent my history data in a different way. So to create a hierarchy, we do add group, and we'll give it a name called zone, and we'll tell it to organize our data, organize our trends off of the property zone. So as I click OK, it completely changes my hierarchy. By default, it creates a default all, which represents the original physical hierarchy that AX creates, and we've got a new one called zone, which is going to split it up into east, north, west, and south, because those are the 4 types of zones that are tagged in the history data. On the left side, we can see that the same thing is happening in AX. So we're building on top of the AX history grouping. In addition, a history group can have more than one property. So I can edit this group to look at zones and then look at units. And once I do that, underneath each of my zones, east, north, west, and south, I have an additional hierarchy layer called unit. So this is not the greatest example, but if you have thousands of trends and you want to go from state to city to zip code to building to floor, this is a really quick way to create those hierarchies. So this history grouping is kind of multi-purpose. You can create new history groups, but you can also roll up data to use our virtual trends. So for example, if I wanted to roll up this east zone to, this could be an east zone, I can click the roll up button down here, and I've got 2 trends in my roll up. I'm going to provide the function of A plus B, or I could choose average, which would be A plus B divided by 2. It's going to go into the roll-ups folder, and we're going to give it the name of East KWH. And we want it to be hourly. So as I click OK, I see that we have automated the process of adding 2 trends together with our virtual histories. Okay, so another thing is you don't have to do this history grouping. We find it beneficial because you can keep track of an east zone and a north zone. But if you just wanted to work off of your histories, that's fine too. You could type in here KWH to find all of our trends that contain this string. You could select all of your KWH trends, so Atkins, Bernard, Bissell, and you can click roll up over here. So this is going to roll up all of those trends into my global KWH. I didn't test this earlier, so I'm hoping that it works. Yep. So as I click OK, we've now got a mega history that is summing up a whole bunch of trends automatically for us. So this is going all the way back in time to the start of each one of these trends and summing them all up. So we now got our total KWH. This trend can now be used anywhere. It can be used in AX, it can be used in Periscope, wherever you'd like. So if I click on the default all, which shows all of my trends, and go to roll-ups, we've now got a global KWH and an east KWH. So those are our two new virtual trends, and they're going to be updating on every hour. Every hour they're going to look at all of the source trends and do the roll-up. Okay, so that's a lot of information that I just threw at you. Those are really the two most complicated features that we've added, and the most powerful as well, the alarming and the virtual trends. So now I'm going to just go over some of the general improvements we've added and enhancements. I think that I've already talked about trending. We've improved the speed of loading. And I think that, oh yeah, one more thing that we've added to Periscope Config is our user account manager, user manager. The user manager allows a super user, a Periscope Config user, to add, edit, and delete AX users. So previously you had to go into Workbench to create a new Periscope user. Now a super user can go in here and create a new user. So if I click on Add User, we see that we have to provide a template user. So we decided rather than recreating the entire category browser and permissions editor from AX, which is very complicated, we would just have a template user. So this template user that you select, we will reuse the permissions from that user. So if there's a dashboard user, you would select that user, and this new user would now have the same permissions. You can also select duplicate dashboard, and if we chose that, then this new user of Tucker would have Greg Barnes' dashboard, a copy of it. And you would give a name and password and click OK. So you can do the same. We can edit and we can delete. And another powerful feature is we can now edit another user's dashboard. So first off, to get into Periscope Config, you've got to be a super user. So this is an administrator account and an administrator-only feature. But one thing we found was that some people had created a kiosk user or a guest user that is non-editable. So people can log in and mess with it, but they can't edit it intentionally. In order for them to actually modify that, they've got to go into that user account, set them to a non-guest user, log in as them, edit the dashboard, and then switch them back. So it was kind of a cumbersome process. This edit account features allows us to select a user. For example, Greg Barnes is a Periscope guest profile, which means that his account is completely locked down from being able to edit Viewlets. If I click on Edit Dashboard, even though I'm logged in as the administrator user, this is G. Barnes' dashboard that loads. So now I'm free to edit, modify, add new Viewlets without having to go through that process of changing their user type and then editing and switching it back. So that's really just a shortcut for super users, quick time saver. Okay, so I think that covers everything on the configuration side. Now I'll show you some of the tweaks on the Periscope side. So you may notice several new things. First off, we see that we've now got the ability to add icons to each of our tabs. So to do that, you right-click on a tab and click on Change Tab Icon. And there's a little library of all of the available icons you can select. You can't provide your own yet. We're working on adding this library and allowing you to specify one, but this is a pretty good base to start with. The green tips Viewlet has also been redone. The style, you may not notice, but it looks different. It's a little smoother, and it now supports more than 10 images. Our previous version was limited to less than 10, so now we can create larger presentations. This view right here is called our performance orb. It works on both the baseline and the weather normalization viewlet. And it's a summary view for both of those viewlets, and it's created off of the underlying data. So right now we're looking at a baseline comparison viewlet, and we see that we have a 26% reduction, and all we know is that it's this month versus last month. So I didn't do a very good job at explaining what we're looking at. So I should have done a better job at editing what this says, like performance orb of energy Atkins or something like that. But anyways, as you double click on this viewlet, we see the underlying data that produced that 26% reduction. So I'm actually looking at Robinson versus the baseline of this month versus last month. So the columns represent this month of Robinson. The red represents our baseline, which appears to be last month. And overall, we have a 26% reduction from our baseline to this month. So just like the normal baseline view, you can see the deltas on a daily basis or see the overview. So to configure this new orb, there is a new performance orb tab, and it's very simple. You can tell it to show always, show never, or only show when not maximized, which is the current configuration. So as I double click it to maximize it, it's going to show the baseline chart. So this is just a feature built on top of the baseline and weather normalization. You don't have to use it. So this, let me change the data. This actually changes from our thermal gradient from green representing good to red representing bad. So let's see if I can show it change color. I'm not sure what my data looks like, but today it's really good. Yesterday, so it's an 8% reduction. Notice that the shade of green kind of changed to more of a yellow. One pretty big usability feature we've added is we've revamped all of our configurations to be standardized and to have more filtering options. So if I click on the configuration of the ranking viewlet, you'll see we've got a new search dialog box that's automatically selected. So whenever you click on a config, you can start typing to filter, just your Atkins trends or just your Bernard trends. Previously, you could manually select a location and manually select a unit, but now on top of that, you can filter by any string you want, which will search your location name and your trend name. So if I just wanted to see Atkins trends, I could type in Atkins, and I could press enter, which would select or deselect whatever the resulting filter is. So as I go to deselect, doesn't appear to be working. So that feature is now part of all of our viewlets. So baseline has the same search dialog, utility performance index, all of our charting, and even live points can now be filtered in real time. So we found that being able to filter by location and unit didn't always cut it, because sometimes you had a location that had 100 kWh trends, and when you're looking for one, it can be kind of difficult. So that's just a real-time filter. Our ranking viewlet now has the ability to plot a goal. So if we had a goal of 2,000 kWh that we wanted all of our buildings to meet over, I'm guessing this is like a month. Okay, this is today. We can check down here this show baseline, and right now it's called show baseline. I think we're changing the wording to say show goal. But you can type in your goal, such as 2,000, and click OK, and you'll have a new line that appears for whatever value that you provided. And this feature is going to show up in more viewlets in the future, but ranking is the first viewlet that it's been implemented in. And finally, we've got smart chart drill downs. So often when you're looking at a chart such as this, it may be abnormal for Bissell to be so high. Bissell, maybe you knew that Bissell was one of your smaller buildings because you did normalization, and it shouldn't be at 2,400. So the next step as an energy manager would be to look at Bissell for this period of time today and figure out when it spiked, and then maybe figure out why it spiked. So we've kind of shortcutted that process. You can now click on any column you want, and you'll be presented with the ability to create a new column chart or a new line chart. So if I click on column, a new column chart will appear, and it will automatically give you the chart you clicked, Bissell, for the time range that this viewlet was selected as well. So this is now showing today for Bissell, and it looks like it rolled it up for us by hour. So it does a few things. It adds a new viewlet, and it guesses the best roll-up type to choose. So if you're looking at this year, we probably don't want to look at hourly, because that would be hundreds of columns. So I think this year it will show you the days of this year. If you selected month, it might show you months, and if you selected today or this week, it may show you hours. So this is just a quick way to drill down into viewlets. Supports column and line, and we have a few viewlets that support the smart chart drill down. The utility performance index, so this is Bernard, or this is Prospector. You can drill into that as well. Let me delete these. And yes, this warning pop-up is new as well. I'm not a huge fan of it. I think we need like a never ask me again checkbox, but it now does prompt you to remove a viewlet. The utility performance index can now show you optional labels. So sometimes when you're looking at a whole bunch of data like this, you have no idea what these represent without being able to interact with the screen. So on a kiosk display, it's not very helpful because the user can't touch or see. So if I double click this, I can now see the labels for each one of these points. That's an optional feature that you can enable always or enable on maximize, similar to the baseline orb. Trying to look at my list and see what I missed. A few more small tweaks that we've made. The line chart has been changed. If I go to my history viewlets and go to a line chart, history line chart. And let me add this real quick. We'll just do a couple KWH points. So our line chart now uses the event history timeline type view. So we've got this little slider down here which allows us to drill down into a specific time range, and it actually automatically rolls up our data. So one thing we found was that with a line chart, people will often try to trend hundreds of thousands of points, and we couldn't actually show all the data. If it's a slower machine, it might take a while. So this max point limit is going to automatically roll up if it exceeds that number of points. So if we're looking at a year of data and they've got, let's say they're trending at 15 minutes, that's going to be more than 150 points. So it's going to try to roll up that data to the next level up, which could be days. If it's more than 150 days, it's going to try to roll it up to the next level, which is months. So for example, let me do last year, and we'll do hours. So we see that even though we selected a whole bunch of data, it's not actually showing every hour of last year. So it automatically rolls it up into different, looks like it found that weeks was the lowest roll-up it could go without exceeding that 150. So we find it useful to prevent people from doing too much, but you don't have to provide one. Let's see that. So that 150 could be lowered to something like 50. I'm not sure if this is 150 or not. It's hard to count. It seems like too much data anyways for this small of a viewlet. Another minor feature that we've added is the point table. I add a new viewlet and go to our point table. We now have the option to set what this name is actually showing. So if I go under options, the display name can either be the point name, the location name, or the location name and the point. Real minor change, but I chose location endpoint, so we can now see that both of these points are part of the Bernard location. Last change, I believe, is we've made some updates to our kiosk mode. Two things. We've added a new user called a kiosk user, and that's configured in either the user manager inside of Periscope config or inside of AX user manager. This new kiosk user is completely locked down, so there's no interaction at all. You can't modify viewlets, you can't do anything. The simple guest user has the ability to click on this button, which means they could do something like save to library or something like that. So kiosk is locked down as they can possibly be. In addition, the kiosk timing manager has a new feature to pause on interaction. So if you had an interactive kiosk where maybe users could drill down into data or drag viewlets around, if you've got it running in kiosk mode and somebody touches the screen or moves the mouse, it will now pause for 1 minute. So this is configurable. You can tell it to pause for 5 minutes or whatever before it continues the kiosk. And the last minor tweak is that Share Viewlet now has copy-paste buttons.